Welcome to Speechless, the customer experience podcast that leaves us without words. From the amazing customer experiences that we've seen to those cringe-worthy experiences that we all know. We will look at all of these experiences and understand how people are treated by businesses and how people remember those businesses. We won't be mentioning any brands by name to maybe praise the worthy, but to also protect the guilty. I'm Matthew Storm, and I'm speechless. And today I have a special guest because as soon as I created the concept for this podcast, I immediately thought I need to talk to Roger Lee. And so welcome to the show, Roger.
Thank you, Matt. Appreciate being here.
Wonderful, wonderful. Well, you and I have known each other for probably 25 years. We've been working in the customer experience space for a long time. Why don't you tell the guests a little bit about your background and maybe how we know each other?
Sure. So that's absolutely true. We've started when we were 10, both Matt and I, in the customer service space. And we look great. So I've known Matt as Matt indicated, for several years. I'm based in beautiful California. Originally was in Minnesota for a number of years and worked in customer service functions. And Matt and I met when I was an end user at Deluxe Corporation in Shoreview, Minnesota. And Matt was working with a vendor at the time, and then I moved from the end user side to the dark side of the world, known as the vendor world. And I've been on both sides of that fence for an extended period of time. And it was a great opportunity for Matt and I to talk about a number of different topics that we have common ground and we're very passionate about. Hence, and some of the things that we talking about will leave you and both Matt and I speechless.
That's right. And I hear you're also an ICMI mentor right now. Tell us more about that.
Absolutely. So I was asked if I would consider mentoring up and coming leaders within the contact center space. So I have a gentleman that I'm mentoring today that is working for a service center, and he is looking to find ways, right, to move up in his career. And unfortunately, I won't say unfortunately, I would say it's a great opportunity, right, to give back. You and I have both been leaders in various parts in our career, and I think with the generation of millennials and the Gen Zers, and eventually, not soon enough, the Gen Alphas, right, are going to be looking for guidance. And I think it's a great opportunity to give back, and I love doing it. So it's a lot of fun.
That sounds right. Great. Well, if you haven't connected with Roger, go find him on LinkedIn. He's Roger Lee. He's pretty easily found there, and he'd love to connect and to tell you a little bit more about that program if you'd like that. Uh, both you and I, we started in this quality monitoring space. For those of you who don't know what that means, that's your call could be recorded for quality purposes. We were on the other end of that with teams of people using software, listening to calls. Yes, people really do listen to those calls. And often they're, coaching their agents, helping them both with what they do on their screen as well as how they communicate. And, as we got started in that, one of the things that I remember the most about that process is that there was a focus, I think, in your program and as well as with me whenever we were on the customer side, that we were not just looking at agent behaviors that made for bad customer service in a call center or a good service. We were also looking for trends much bigger than what was just something that was the agent's fault. And so as we did that, what were some of the insights that you took out of that when you realized, hey, some of these things are impacting this particular employee, but some of these, when you listen to recordings, you discover problems that are maybe much larger than just one employee's behavior?
Yeah, that's a good point. So you always the focus around trying to find what the agent did wrong, right? So that was one of the things that I felt, you and I both talked about this when we were doing, is that QA became the big brother, right? Of, hey, finding what we did wrong or find what our agents did wrong versus what they did right. So there was what I call making sure that the customer service reps delivered a great experience. We had a list of criteria. Sometimes we called it a checklist. Sometimes we got to the point where we're doing it on a graduated scale, whatever the case may be, right? So it was really about trying to find ways to improve the skills of this particular agent. So that's one avenue. The other data points that we were trying to capture, and we did, which was what are our customers telling us, right, through those interactions, right? It's not just worrying about transaction level, right? How did the agent perform engaging with the customer, but what other insights? So, for example, is there competitors, right, that they are getting a better experience with and that we need to learn from that, what we can do better? Is there price sensitivity? And there was in some of the cases when I was at Deluxe where the customers would say, hey, this seems to be awfully high, yet your competitor X is charging less. Help me understand why. That's important information. And also, if we were marketing new solutions or new products, our customer service reps basically had a script to utilize, right? We would want to measure the effectiveness, right, of that script. Were they able to not only to introduce, but were able to make the sale and close on that, as they're having that conversation. So it was more than just voice of the agent, so to speak, or voice of the employee, right? We want to get voice of the business, voice of the process melded into the QA program.
Sure, sure. And one little soundbite that you always said that I always liked is that you would often say, one call doesn't make a trend. And when you say one call doesn't make a trend, it's usually that, oh, I heard one agent and one customer say this. So that must be, it must be rampant across the organization, or every agent feels this way, or every customer feels that this is, unfair or right or wrong or happy about it. And so, which leads me to another part of your resume, which is as a Six Sigma black belt. So, as you look for trends what what type of sample size, what are we looking for whenever you hear something that could be a trend and you've heard it once? How many instances of good behavior or bad behavior do you need to go make a change in your business?
Yeah, so as you know, from a Six Sigma standpoint, right, if in order to achieve Six Sigma status, right, it's 3.4 defects per 1 million outputs, right? So if you think about at the time we were a check producer, 1 million boxes of checks that were being produced, only 3.4 had to have defects in it, right? Well, good luck. I mean, reality is you strive toward that. As we're listening from implying that from a customer service perspective, listening to calls, right? You're right. One data point doesn't make a trend, right? It could be just an anomaly, right? And those things are going to happen. If you think about when we had quality management teams, QA teams, or I used to call them skill enhancement teams because we're trying to rule away, right, the ugly big brother approach, was that you only had a handful of folks listening to calls, right? You also we utilize tools such as conversational analytics, at the time speech analytics, to really look at the population of calls where our QA folks weren't able to do that. Combine that to say, hey, what are some of the themes and trends that we're seeing across the sites, across the teams? That gave us better confidence, right? So our confidence level would be higher. And I think, we wanted directional data. Then we would take that information from the analysis and say, where do we need to hone in on, right? If there's a common theme, right? For example, and this sounds very fundamental, but a lot of times I could hear this. Agents could not, customer service reps could not do this consistently, even though they were on calls all day long, is thank the customer for their business or refer them right to our site, our website, right? Very simple things to do. Now, granted, is that a common theme? There was, but there was a handful of agents that could not do it. Easy, fine, coaching opportunity, great, no big deal. But we were looking for something, was there something larger, right? Something that was going to give us a competitive edge, right? So again, one data point didn't make a trend. It could have been an anomaly, but that's why we would leverage tools such as speech analytics, now AI conversational analytics, to really look across the population of calls to really help point us in the right direction of what we needed to focus on.
Sure. And the good thing about AI conversational analytics is that before, when we were using speech analytics, you and I would put words and phrases into categories, and then we could quantify, okay, there were 4,000 calls about this topic. but Gen AI is changing that because now what could be 3 or 4 customer intents about why people, I'm calling for 2 or 3 reasons. Maybe Gen AI could summarize that down into a billing issue or a support issue or a problem with the delivery or whatever the issue might be. Um, and so when you have this data, whether it's from speech analytics, manual observation, maybe Gen AI based conversational analytics, and you have this great insight, how do you take something, and I'll use your words, you said defect, not me. How do you go to someone in part of the business that you're not as familiar with and tell someone, hey, I just want to let you know we've noticed a defect in the way you've designed your web page, or the way you've designed the pricing in the example that you gave. How do you do that gently where you take some information and go to someone and give them that news?
Well, first of all, yes, I did say defect, but humans, I would say error. So let me course correct that. If
Okay.
I'm producing widgets or checks, defect, yes. Human, well, you could call sometimes maybe some of the humans are defects because they couldn't get their shit stuff together, but that's okay. But in this particular case, if there was an issue with a website, so if we had enough data, enough call recordings, enough transcripts, enough directional data to say, hey, we are hearing from the voice of the customer a lot of issues or complaints or feedback, right, about something not working. It's data, right? And what I would have done is taken that information and I would take in some of the calls, right? Because the call recordings were available and say, hey, Mr. Person that owns, right, the department for the website, I want you to listen to these calls because I want you to hear what's happening. You may not be aware of this, or you may not be getting the appropriate analysis or reports from the back end to say there was a problem, or you're not viewing this as a priority. And I'm telling
Right.
you, this is a priority, right? So part of it would be to foster that relationship to how to, so it shouldn't be a combative discussion. It should be very fact-based driven conversation. We're trying at the end of the day, right, service our customers or end users so they can have a great experience. Period. So my approach would have been or has been at the time would be here's the information. Let's walk through it, right? Let me help you understand why this is so important. And then how do we address it so that we can reduce, right, the frustration from those customers that are calling in about a negative experience. And it should be, right, a very simple conversation.
And you can quantify
Yes.
the value, because if I have to drive down to a branch, ask someone a question, and drive back home, there is a cost associated with that as the customer. I feel like the effort that I've put into this problem or issue or ordering something is high. The same is true on the organization side too, is that if I see that people are calling in because of a failure, on the website, or a defect in the way something was designed, that you can easily quantify that with, a phone call isn't cheap. Every time, if you're a guest and you call a call center, you're costing them money because something didn't work right. And you could easily quantify that. And I can say, we took 7,000 calls about that last month. If we were to reduce that even just by half, that's this times this much per call. That's some significant savings typically. Whenever you can present that type of evidence, if you will, to someone, I think that's really, really important. What do
Well,
you
you
think?
mentioned a
Yeah.
you mentioned a key point, Matt, about effort, right? You also can measure customer effort. And if the experience is not effortless, which a lot of organizations and brands strive for, then we failed. And if everyone's on the same page and understands that and you're being measured on that, this should be a very, again, easy, straightforward conversation on how do we create an effortless experience. And you and I can talk about so many different examples, right? Whether it be going to Home Depot or ordering something on Home Depot to try to get something from them, or in other brands that you know, have done a pretty good job of trying to make sure they anticipate so that there's that effortless experience that you and I expect.
Yeah. And I know you're a big proponent of making the experience effortless for the employee as well. I notice it in in restaurants where wait staff really struggle with if it's a handheld device that they're putting the order in. I was at a restaurant over the weekend and there was a modification to it that was like, well, I don't see that. And you could see the frustration in their face and it made it a little uncomfortable. They handled it really well. Or, a website or something's designed or I often hear people in healthcare, they apologize for their own company's um, bad processes. Like, oh, well, I'm really sorry. Yeah, those those notices that come out are kind of confusing. I know that doesn't really make any sense, or I don't know. I know you're not really supposed to pay that yet because the insurance claim hasn't been filed. Typical things like that happen in organizations. But when it comes to the employee experience, any great examples where you've seen someone shift how happy an employee is, and then it turns into a better experience for the customer?
Yeah, what I will tell you, one of the companies that I had the opportunity to work with, they were a customer of ours, and the focus was making sure that the employee had what they needed to be set up for success as they're having these conversations with their customers or basically their end users. And I will tell you, right, the employees there's a tendency, right, to always focus on customer effort, customer experience. But we also need to make sure, right, that a customer service rep doesn't have to navigate through 5 different screens to get information that is needed for the customer. So
Yeah,
this
because
one organization,
if you hear an agent immediately on a phone call say, well, thank you for calling. I see what you're trying to do. Hold on just a minute. I'm going to put you on hold and research your account. They don't have what they need on the screen. They're
exactly,
alt tabbing
exactly.
between 4 or 5 screens and maybe 10. Yeah, that's true.
There was one organization, and this is no lie, 67 screens that a customer service rep had to navigate because the systems, they had a legacy system and they had a new system. And unfortunately, they could not get information from the legacy system into the new system. So therefore, the legacy system has some vital information. So when you're looking at where was the source of truth, I don't know which of the 67 screens where the source of truth would lie. But that's not creating a great employee experience. As a matter of fact, employee frustration, and there was a lot of turnover, and they had asked me my advice on what they needed to do to improve employee retention. I said, in my Roger ways of saying things and as politely as possible was, really, you're asking me that question? You just told me your employee's got to navigate 67 screens. Let me think about how to improve that employee experience. Anyway, so
Easily done.
easily done, right? So then the person who ran that whole department retired. Yeah, good call. You retired, and then you still left them with 67 screens. But the point is, employee experience is just as important as the customer experience because at the end of the day, old adage, employees are happy, they will deliver a great experience because they have the tools and they have the process in place to support what they're expected to do. I don't care if it's AI. It is AI. You're still going to need, right, the processes in place to be able to support and provide that experience.
And, it starts often at the top because if the employees in most organizations that are frontline, they are your brand. They are out there, serving your customers over the phone, serving your customers in restaurants and hotels and shops and airlines. And if they don't feel that experience from their manager, and that manager doesn't feel that experience from their leader, then it's often broken. It's just like, well, that's just the way it's done at the front line. And it doesn't have to be that way in most cases. It's usually that often leaders don't have any idea that there's actually a difficult process that's impacting that type of customer experience and that they could go make a change.
Yeah, that's a whole different conversation because part of it, from my perspective, is the role of the leader. You and I both know is to be able to coach and develop their teams. And they can't necessarily do that successfully unless they have time to be able to do that. Now, argumentatively, right? If you are a leader, you find the time to coach and develop your team so that they can be set up for success. At the same point in time, right, it's managing upward to make sure that the leaders have what they need in place, right, and support from leadership to be able to do that. I mean, it's an interesting. I spoke at an event last week in Phoenix where I had the opportunity to talk about leadership in the age of AI, as well as cross how to effectively leverage the strengths of the generations, right, as you are moving up in your career. So two different topics, but all very, very related insofar as I think there's a tendency to use certain words as, hey, do more with less, be transparent. There's a number of words that we throw out that we want our leaders to do, but sometimes they're contradicting, right? You want me to be transparent. However, I'm going to make some significant changes, but I can't quite tell you the reason why yet. Oh, and by the way, there is a basic, right, corporate mandate, a script, so to speak, right, that I have to follow, which doesn't come across as sincere, right? It comes across as pretty much robotic and rote. And then I think the other thing, right, we talk about AI, right? There's this tendency where AI is not the silver bullet, people. It is a technology tool. It is an enabler. You still need to put things in place to support the humans in the loop that still need to have the conversations with our end customers.
Yeah. Putting the humans in the loop. I like that for sure. Well, on every episode, what I like to do is also ask for a story. So I'm gonna start with my story first because it involves you actually. Um, a number of years ago, you and I were at a dinner together, and we were walking into a restaurant. And because we're saying great things about this brand, I'll mention the name. We were at Nick and Sam's in Dallas, which is a beautiful steakhouse, really, really nice place. We've actually been there a couple times, you and I. But the first time I went, I walked in, I was in a suit and I was just about to sit down. And as someone saw me sit down, they were going around and they were picking up napkins from the plate and they were putting it in your lap and putting it in your lap. And whenever they came to me, the person had another napkin on their arm that was black instead of white and said, would you like a black napkin, sir? And I said, okay, at first. And then I realized it was so that the white napkin didn't leave little fuzzies on my pants. And then I was just like, what? And I remember we were there with some folks from England and they were just amazed at something, literally speechless, that something as little as I'm going to give this person a black napkin and so that it doesn't mess up their pants versus a white napkin. Someone had to research that or hear it enough times that it was a defect or a human error or whatever it might be that, hey, you know what we should do? We should just go out and buy 30 black napkins. What would that cost? It can't be that expensive. And then just have those available so that when you seat someone that you have a few of them available so that you just notice the color of pants that they have on and give them the right color of napkin so that it doesn't, leave those fuzzies on their dress or on a pair of pants. And I just thought that was a fascinating story. Hopefully you and I get to go back to Nick and Sam's again someday in the future. And but that's my story of a speechless experience. What about you, Roger? What is an example of something that you've had happen to you that has left you speechless?
Well, just piggyback real quick on your napkin story there, buddy. When you wear dark pants or dark suits, the reason why they give you a black napkin, because that way you don't walk around with looking like you have fuzz all over you. And so a white linen napkin will leave that fuzz. So that's the reason we don't want to pay for an extra dry cleaning bill unnecessarily. So that's the reason why the black napkin is given or asked if you would care for that. But yeah, that's a great experience, and that's proactive, right, versus reactive. Definitely agree and support. And yeah, Nick and Sam's is one of our most favorite steakhouses, and I'm just salivating over that steak right now. All right, my speechless experience has to do with a company, a brand by the name of Chewy. So many people here who will be listening to this, I'm sure, have pets or know people who have pets. Chewy has won a number of awards for their stellar customer service. When you call, and actually I had to call, and I'll give a little background about it, but I had to call and I actually didn't have to go through an IVR. I actually got a live body when picked up the call. And basically what happened is we had two beautiful Australian Terriers, Sky and Coco, that ultimately had passed away at the same time. And I had a lot of dog food, unopened dog food that was a special for them because of their dietary needs at the time. And so I called Chewy, explained the situation, said, "Hey, I've got this dog food. I don't want to throw it away. It hasn't been opened. What should I do? Do you want it back?" First of all, they apologized, right, for the death of our two dogs, and said, "Hey, look, no, don't worry about it. Um, if you have a animal shelter nearby you or dog shelter nearby you, feel free to please go ahead and drop it off. I'm sure they could make good use of it, and we'll just go ahead and credit, which was not necessary, but credit your account." Because you're not going to be able to utilize that dog food anymore. And first of all, I was like, wow, I wasn't expecting a credit. I just wanted to, make sure that some other family animal could dog could utilize the food.
Sure.
And then a few days later, I received a basically a sympathy card from Chewy, actually from that rep. It was handwritten, wasn't typed out. It wasn't a form card, and there were a couple other agents that had signed their names. I didn't recognize them, of course. I just dealt with the one agent, but it was very nice. I think it was over, above and beyond from my perspective, but related, right? It was relatable, right? Our pets are part of the family, so it's definitely a very, for me, was not only a speechless moment, but also set things apart for me of who I will do business moving forward if I ever get another pet.
Yeah.
So, yep.
Wow. That's an incredible story and probably a very small touch that, maybe took 30 seconds of that agent's time, maybe 50 cents for a Chewy's card, whatever the price of a stamp is these days. I don't know, and it, probably all in less than a $2 gesture that's really made an impression. You have more dogs now, right? And
We
still
have,
use
yes,
Chewy,
we
I'm
do
assuming.
have, yep, we do, and we still are. My Chewy order seems to be higher because now we have one dog, but we have a bigger dog, a beautiful golden doodle at 70 pounds. So if you can imagine, that's a lot of dog food compared to two little 15-pound dogs.
That is
um,
true.
but yeah, so we are definitely loyal to Chewy. I mean, there's some things, right? Some people say, well, some of the prices, you can get a little bit better at other places. You're absolutely correct, but the experience and I think was very important, but and just the willingness, right, to work with us at our time was very impactful and it would create a great memorable experience. So I think that is something that you can go other places and get things cheaper, and that's fine. Not necessarily, are you going to get the experience that you would expect, right? It could be just oh hum service, and if you want
Right.
mediocre service, go for it.
Well, thank you for that story. And thank you for your insights today, helping us remember, you know, one thing doesn't create a trend. Go out there and find it. Take your information gently and take it to the people that matter and present to that with them directly. And also looking for those moments that could impact the customer experience. So, if you again don't follow Roger, go out, find him on LinkedIn, connect with him, and he'd love to chat more, I'm sure, about the customer experiences that you have at your organization. And thank you for taking the time to sit down and chat with me today, Roger.
My pleasure. Have a good rest of your day.
You too. Thank you for joining us, everyone. We'll see you on the next episode of Speechless.